Great. Okay, I think we'll make a start. Um, so welcome to this members meeting of the Green Party Trade Union Group. So if you're new to us, if you haven't been to one of these before, the Green Party Trade Union Group is the home for trade unionists and allies in the Green Party of England and Wales. We believe that a powerful, organised labour movement bringing together millions of working people is essential to transforming society for people and the planet. And tonight we're going to be looking at the subject of worker-led transition. So this is the effort to put workers into the driving seat of the transition to net zero. We've got some great speakers who'll present, and then what we usually do is we move to a Q&A. So get thinking of your questions while our speakers are talking, and then we've got a few items to cover, just a few members updates, which we'll do at the end. So we'll be finished up by 8:15 once we've done the members updates there. But we'll do the first 45 minutes of discussion on the main topic for tonight. Just a reminder, I sent out by email, but a reminder that we've got our AGM coming up on the 2nd of December. So do sign up for that. I'll put the link in the chat now. And also to flag that all of our committee is up for election and nominations for that open this evening. So if you like what we do and if you're interested in strengthening the links between the Green Party and trade unions, and you want to see more of that happening, this is your chance to get involved. So please do have a look and consider standing for the committee. So nominations for that open tonight for all 7 positions on the committee. And if you've got any questions about that, feel free to get in touch, and the details are in the links that I've just put in the chat. Okay, so on to the main topic for this evening. So, the topic of worker-led transitions. So, with unions clashing at September's TUC Congress on North Sea oil and gas licenses, what approach will the labour movement take? Whoop, I think that's you, James. Cheers. What approach will the labour movement take towards a government now committed to near zero carbon electricity by 2030? What can we learn about the closure of the UK's last coal power station in Ratcliffe-on-Soar? And the government has also promised a new modern industrial strategy next spring. So will that fly in the face of the climate crisis, or could it go some way towards the rapid transition that we need? And then finally, what about the question of ownership? One on which the Labour and Green movements are aligned, but still seems to be largely absent from the debate. So we've got 3 great speakers to kick off this discussion. First of all, we'll hear from Craig Stewart, who's a worker-led transition project officer at the TUC. Then we've got Michael Agboh-Davison, who's an organiser with Unite for a Workers' Economy. And then Ruby Earle, who's a Just Transition campaigner at Platform, who's been bringing together the labour movements and the environmental movements for the last few years really effectively. So thanks all of you for joining us. And Craig, I'll let you kick things off.
Lovely, thank you very much. If you just bear with me 1 second, and I will attempt to share my presentation. Can you see that full screen? Can you? No, 1 moment.
Not yet. Great.
Is that any better?
That's it.
Perfect. Right. So yeah, firstly, just thank you for giving me the time to talk about Ratcliffe this evening. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a project officer for the TUC's worker-led transition team, and our interest in the closure of Ratcliffe came about that obviously, despite it being a difficult time for the workers on site there were some successes that we could take away from the experience and use within the project. I'm not sure what everybody's knowledge of the term just transition is, but for those who are aware of it, I think we can probably all agree it can mean different things to different people. For us within the project, the key part of that really is that a just transition should leave no worker behind. That being said, I'll just give you some basics on Ratcliffe-on-Soar and what it was. It's basically, so Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station was a coal-fired power plant constructed in the 1960s near the River Soar in Nottinghamshire. It's a 2 gigawatt capacity, which was enough to power 2 million homes. It was owned and operated by the German energy company Uniper, and there was three recognised unions on site, which were Prospect, Unite, and JMB. In 2015, the UK government announced that all coal power stations were closed by 2025. This was subsequently brought forward to 2024, which then obviously brought about the operations ceasing at the end of September this year. And that was quite a key part in the transition planning, was that they had prior notification that the site was going to close. We'll sort of touch on that a bit later. That brought about 140 years of coal power to a close in the UK. And at the time of closure, there was approximately 154 workers on site. Despite the difficult situation that the workers faced, obviously mass job losses, site closure, it was really stressed to me on my site walk around with JMB that they made the best of a bad situation. And it was quite surprising, really, that they were very, very complimentary of how Uniper handled the closure. I mean, I went to the site expecting doom and gloom, but it was quite the opposite. It was really impressive, and that just showed how successful the transition was. So despite the closure of the site, there were many success stories within the transition. So there was internal job opportunities within Uniper, and they were at Connors Quay Power Station, the Cotton Development Centre, and there was a small on-site technology centre also being developed. There was external job opportunities due to relationships that Uniper had built with businesses within the sector, such as Enfinium and Drax. They had negotiated an enhanced voluntary redundancy package. There was flexible release for all workers, allowing staff to leave for new employment prior to the agreed redundancy date, while still being entitled to the full redundancy package. So what that essentially meant was, if a worker, for example, was given a redundancy date of October 2025, but they found employment in the July of that year, they would still be entitled to the full redundancy package, even in taking the new employment. So that gave them a lot of flexibility and confidence that they could find new employment. So it was really, that was really a key part of the transition. And finally, the workers were all given release from the working schedule to attend fully funded external training courses. Again, this was really like a good, strong gesture from Uniper to show commitment that they were willing to help reskill and retrain the workers there. Obviously, like I just discussed, there's a lot of successes, but there was still one clear opportunity for improvement on that transition. Despite it being located within a free port, it had a local development order in place and strong legacy infrastructure from obviously being a power plant. There's no immediate plans for redevelopment on the site. This meant that the majority of the workforce had to disperse in order to gain future employment. That in turn then makes the site less desirable for any potential investors for redevelopment. It's quite, once you've had that skilled workforce disband, it's really difficult to build it back up again. So that was just one of the main opportunities for improvement. So the key lessons really that we can take away from Ratcliffe and apply to future situations or future transition planning was that foresight to plan early provided the time and space to successfully plan for the inevitable closure. Now, that's what I mentioned earlier about it was government policy that the site was going to close. Not all industries are going to have that same warning. So it's imperative that you have the foresight to start planning early. And that was a key point there. All three unions also had to work together towards a common goal. This allowed a clear stance to negotiate with the company management structure. Commitment from the company management structure was vital in allowing the workforce to retrain, reskill, and relocate. Union representation within the company European Works Council allowed a union voice to be present at times of key decision making. That was another point that they really did reinforce when speaking with reps. And finally, positive relationship between the unions and company management benefited everyone involved. The commitment to assist the workforce during the transition helped the company with staff retention, allowing operations to continue right up until the planned closure date. So essentially what I'm saying there is what was good for the worker also ended up being good for the employer, because they managed to just maintain operations throughout. If the staff retention rate had dropped too low, they would have had to cease operations before the planned date, and obviously that wouldn't have been beneficial to the company. Bit of a speedy summary, really, there of Ratcliffe. There was a lot going on there. Hopefully it made sense. But if there's any questions, I've also wrote a blog on the closure, which is available on the TUC website, and that should give you a bit more of an in-depth sort of analysis of what happened at Ratcliffe. But yeah, so thank you for your time.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Greg. Really interesting example there and lots to learn from it. If anyone has questions on that one, feel free to put them in the chat. But let's go on to Michael for your presentation, and then we'll come back to questions after everyone's presented.
Brilliant, thanks. So hopefully you can all see this. Well, I'll rattle through this quite quickly. Again, I imagine there'll be questions from it. Give you a bit of an idea about what we're doing. So Unite for a Workers' Economy. You may have seen the name around certainly if you use social media. So it's a new function within Unite. Effectively, it's a change in how we're approaching politics. We remain a Labour affiliated union. Different opinions on whether that's the right way to go. But we've decided on a policy with the current General Secretary that there are no blank checks now. The money that our political fund money that was going to Labour, effectively an open purse for Labour, we're using that instead to fight directly around political issues that affect our members. And the Labour government clearly is the decision maker in many of these issues. So we're in effect campaigning often directly against the Labour government. Some of the issues, so what the Workers' Economy project's really looking at issues that can't be won on an industrial basis, that need something more. They need a political angle to win. Examples, a quite high profile example at the moment is what we're doing around the cuts to winter fuel payment, which has kind of snowballed into quite a big campaign. But we've done other campaigns around energy renationalisation, for example, smaller local-ish campaigns around a successful campaign around wiping school meal debt in Scotland, for example. Again, things that the union can't win through the workplace, but very much more I think politically combative than we might have been in the past. So the tactics, we're exploring sort of what are for us novel tactics in terms of campaign building. So reaching out to in communities to find allies among communities. We've done a lot of work with grassroots sports clubs, with charities, small businesses, where we've got a common goal, and following similar tactics to what we would use organizing in a workplace, effectively finding effective leaders in communities, bringing people together in collective action to kind of build up the strength of a campaign. We're doing a lot about getting messages out in different ways that kind of surprise people a little bit. We've done a lot of work, for example, billboards, murals, things like that, just getting messages out that kind of jar people a bit and go, well, hang on, why is a trade union doing this? Why is a trade union speaking to us in this way? Using those sort of tactics to raise the profile of a campaign with the ultimate aim of exerting pressure on decision makers, which in the campaigns we're looking at is invariably going to be politicians. So which kind of brings us to the current one of the two current campaigns that we're running on a large scale, which is No Ban Without a Plan. A title which in hindsight we might not have chosen, but we're stuck with it now because we've gone this far. But we do end up having to do a lot of explaining around that. So this started from the basis that Labour's announcement to ban future North Sea exploration, which I think we can all agree is the correct approach, However, it comes with no overall plan for what's going to happen to jobs. And we're not talking about jobs in 5 or 6 years' time. We're talking about jobs slowly degrading now. So estimates vary, but between about 35,000 jobs by 2030 at risk. So the campaign's Scotland based. So it's almost exclusively working around the Scottish oil and gas areas, so northeast Scotland and the kind of Falkirk Grangemouth area. Campaign demand broadly is create new jobs to replace the jobs that are going to go in oil and gas. We know that the North Sea oil and gas industry has a very finite lifespan. It's not going to last much longer, even if exploration was expanded. It's going to end soon. So there's perfectly viable possibility to use the skills of offshore workers, transfer very closely to offshore wind, and there's other things like decommissioning and odd things like subsea cable installation, for example. There's not a lot of jobs in it, but there are jobs there. None of that's going to happen without government intervention. It's not going to happen if we just let the market do what it does. And clearly those jobs need to be commensurate with current offshore jobs. Jobs in the renewable sector right now are on certainly much worse pay than oil and gas. We can't expect workers to be impoverished by a move into green industries. Next things we've got coming up, we're working quite a bit on putting pressure on Scottish politicians, so Scottish MPs and MSPs, to back a pledge, which you can see on the right of the screen there, calling on the UK Labour government to implement or to produce a funded plan for transition, which is what we're missing. We're doing a lot of work around Grangemouth refinery again. Labour's kind of fallen at the first hurdle here by allowing Grangemouth to close. Clearly, our argument is that should be kept open, and as part of a transition to what we'd suggest that biofuels offer a viable future for the Grangemouth site. So our next kind of big public action around that is going to be in Holyrood on 28th of November. There's a big march and rally there with the Grangemouth workforce. And we're doing a lot of kind of on the ground building up workplace campaigns. Some could talk about a great length, but effectively getting people to engage with a big campaign around just transition an entire industry is incredibly difficult. So we start with workplace level campaigns, problems with your rostering, problems with PPE, things like that, and build up from there rather than expecting people to engage instantly with a massive complex idea. We can lead people into that through campaigns that are much more grassroots. So that's very, very quick, the fastest I think I've ever talked about this. So I'll finish there.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Michael. There's loads to get into there, and I'm sure there'll be a few questions. I definitely want to ask about the what you mentioned about the hindsight over the name. But yeah, Ruby, do you want to go ahead and tell us about what Platform have been doing?
Hey, yeah, thank you. Firstly, apologies, I don't have slides. I'm now regretting not having nice slides instead of my face in front of you all. But nice to see you all. My name is Ruby, and I'm a Just Transition campaigner at Platform. And it's really great to be here with you all, and also to hear the contributions just made. They're very interesting. So, for a bit of context for some of the work that Platform has been doing over the last couple of years, Platform, in collaboration with Friends of the Earth Scotland, published a report called the Our Power Report, which is a set of 10 demands, which together form a workers' plan for a just transition in the North Sea. And the report came about through 3 years of organising with energy workers and unions in the North Sea. And it started with my predecessors spending days on end hanging out in pubs in Aberdeen, meeting oil and gas workers who were heading out or about to come back from offshore. And it then developed into a survey of over 1,300 oil and gas workers, which was followed by 6 in-person workshops across Aberdeen, Edinburgh, and Newcastle. And these conversations, during these conversations, key themes started to develop, many of which have been talked about already today. These themes were then tested, or the demands that came out of these themes were then tested with the wider workforce of a survey of over 1,000 workers in 2022. And out of these 10 demands, which were endorsed by 90% of the workforce, as well as Unite Scotland and RMT, PCS, Union and Unison, as well as numerous climate and environmental groups. And I think someone's just kindly posted the report in the chat. I can also do that at the end, but I won't go too much into the demands because hopefully quite a lot of you have come across the report already, but they spanned across specific just transition demands, so things like worker-led just transition planning, an offshore training passport, sectoral collective bargaining, jobs guarantee for high carbon workers. So as was just mentioned, like people aren't moving into badly paid jobs with poor conditions in the renewables industry. But they also talked about like whole economy demands also, which have been mentioned, such as public investment in wind manufacturing and public and community ownership of energy. Since the report was published in March last year, we've been working with climate groups and unions to launch and run campaigns on different elements of the worker-led demands. And we've had some small wins already. I'm not sure I want to fully call them wins yet, but some developments. The new government recently announced that they would be stepping in to speed up the delivery of the skills passport after the offshore oil and gas and renewables standards bodies continued to stall the rollout of the passport, despite being granted 5 million to deliver it by autumn 2023. So this was a welcome move. We've very much taken our lead from Unite and RMT on their responses to it, but it's good that the government is stepping in. We've long been calling for this passport to be delivered by a public body, not a profit-driven private training bodies. So we think it could go much further. And we also think it needs to be accompanied by further training funds as well. The other big area of work that we've been involved in over the last couple of months has been trying to bring together a coalition of climate groups and industrial unions to call on the new Labour government to stop relying on industry bosses and the market to deliver the energy transition. So we've been working very closely with Unite for a Workers' Economy, as well as RMT and Greenpeace and All Change International and FOES and Uplift, Friends of Gas Scotland and Uplift, to organise an open letter calling on Rachel Reeves to stop prioritising shareholder profits and instead fund a 1.9 billion ring-fenced just transition funding package for oil and gas workers. And in this funding package, that includes the 1.1 billion that Unite are calling for, specifically for investment in wind manufacturing jobs, which we know is where the jobs are created. But it also has 440 million of further investment each year for ports, as well as a 355 million per year fund to develop a dedicated training fund for offshore oil and gas workers, all of which are demands taken from the Our Power report, which are worker-led demands. So the letter was signed by 65 climate groups and endorsed by Unite and RMT and PCS, as well as the Scottish TUC and Aberdeen and Moray TUCs as well. And over 60 people from across the union and climate movement rallied together outside the Treasury to deliver the letter to the Chancellor a couple of weeks before the budget, which is a really beautiful show of the growing solidarity between our two movements. And we have speeches from the team lead in Unite's Organising and Leverage Department, as well as the Assistant General Secretary at PCS and MPs, including Green MP Sian Berry. We also worked with Carla Denyer MP to raise our demands in Parliament. So looking to the future, we're going to be continuing to work with these unions and climate groups to try and scale up this national campaigning ahead of the spending review. And we hope to use this growing campaign to not only increase united pressure on the new Chancellor to commit to further spending towards a just transition and a proper plan, but to also improve climate groups' knowledge of and commitment to worker-led just transition planning, just transition demands, as well as highlight the increasing solidarity and collaboration between our two movements. I'll end very briefly and maybe a bit cheesily with one of my favourite speeches from the rally that took place a couple of weeks ago from a Unite comrade. And I think this summarises what we're trying to do at Platform and also what lots of people on this call are trying to do and work towards. So the speaker said, the government tries to pit trade unions against climate groups, but we all stand here today united to say no more. It's time for change. We stand together to demand the government funds a UK-wide industrial strategy. On that, I will stop there. On those hopefully inspiring words, I will stop there. But looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ruby. And thanks to all three of you for those great presentations. Does anyone have any questions for Ruby, first of all? Because Ruby, I'm conscious you said you had to go. So I suggest if we've got questions for Ruby, let's start with those. And then we'll go on to the questions I've got in the chat here for Michael and for Craig. So I see a hand there. Alan, is yours a question for Ruby? No. I'll come back to you. Les, is yours a question for Ruby?
Well, no, I've forgotten which speaker used which phrases. But one speaker spoke about no ban without a plan, and another speaker spoke about biofuels. Was that the same speaker?
Yes, Michael's nodding. He used both of those.
Oh, okay. So I'll wait.
Okay, cool. Julian?
Yeah, specifically.
I can also stay for like another 10 or so minutes, Rob.
Okay, cool.
Thank you for the presentation, Ruby. Specific question: your surveys of offshore workers, how many of them were looking forward to a job which was not offshore? So I'm just thinking about the location and what a transition means for individuals, really.
Totally, great question. So I would have to go and look at the exact number for that question. But what I do know is that all of the demands were supported. All of the 10 demands were supported by over 93% of the workforce that we surveyed. And in that, like those demands were very much like we're talking about a clear pathway out of offshore oil and gas work and towards jobs in the renewables. So I think it would be safe to say that over the 93% of the workforce that we surveyed were like up for and keen to do that. I think what's really important to say though is that we've set up recently a sort of workers advisory board, which is made up of the workforce that were involved in the Our Power project, so that they can help like continue to lead the work that we do, so that it's not sort of directed by myself, but it's directed by the workers. And the feeling, I would say, is shifting like considerably from when we were working with them. There's a real like their sort of willingness to talk about their keenness to transition into renewables industry is less so because the jobs just aren't being created. And it's a real like, and it's a fear. So I think, so we sort of have journalists contact us and sort of they want to speak to the workers that want to move into renewables, and we do, like, we've worked with 1,000 oil and gas workers that do want that. But I would say now their key message is not like how keen they are to move into renewables, it's how the jobs just aren't being created, which is where the sort of demands of the campaign that definitely Unite are working on, but that we're also working on is like have come from, which is about trying to like work within the climate movement to have honest conversations about the fact that we can't just talk about like good green jobs anymore, because like wind manufacturing has grown, like wind renewables industry has grown, but the jobs haven't upped as well. So yeah, so like a huge keenness, 100%, but like a more sort of urgent need for a discussion around why jobs aren't being created and what we can do to support that.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I'll come in with a follow-up on my own for you, Ruby, if you don't mind. Which is just about the asks to government and what scope there is for progress on those, you think, in the next couple of years. And I get what you've just said about it depending really about the commitment to actually creating the jobs for people to go into wherever those are. But in terms of the political leverage and pushing for more spending on this, like the gap between what you mentioned for the skills passport, I think you said 5 million versus the training fund of 300 million, I think it was, shows the scale of that gap, even if the government is starting to use the right language about skills, the skills transition now. So how hopeful are you for that, and what would it take for to like strengthen that commitment from government?
Yeah, it's a great and important question. So I think a few sort of parts to that, a few parts to my answer. I think firstly, there feels like, and the workers that we speak to, and also the climate groups that we work with, that there is that is exactly as you said, there's a huge gap. We suddenly have a government that is talking the right rhetoric around a just transition, but is all of that is directed at leveraging private finance to deliver on the commitments on job creation, etc. And everything that we have seen so far, so from including the offshore training passport, is that industry will only invest in areas that are profitable. They won't deliver at the scale and pace needed, both for workers urgently and for the climate. And so sort of, which is where our theory of change comes around in terms of trying to highlight and or build the growing movement, both of climate groups and of unions, that are sort of highlighting that gap and are calling out that gap in rhetoric. I think we have seen an interesting budget. I think there's been lots of talk about the investment that's in it. Our concern is that it's still very much not enough. None of it is ring-fenced for oil and gas workers, for high carbon workers, and that we need to see that. In terms of whether I feel, but sorry, to finish that point, I think, but it has shown that the government is willing to invest and is willing to change the fiscal rules to invest. So I think that does offer an opportunity, and I think we by growing the movement, the united movement of climate groups and workers and unions that are calling for this as an absolute must, there is an opportunity there. I wouldn't say I'm overly hopeful, but I also am completely committed to the absolute necessity of it. And I think increasingly the climate movements and groups that we work with are as well, that if we don't get this right, we've lost the battle and the war. So it feels, so yeah, I want to be more hopeful. I'm inspired by the growing sort of collaboration between the two movements. It's great to be on this call. I recently went to Stop Rosebank Strategy Day and delivered a just transition training, and the desire and keenness from activists there to do more just transition work and to work with their local unions and to try and develop this sort of partnership. I think the only thing that will win this is that, and I feel like that is happening increasingly, which is really exciting. So yeah, a bit of hope.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think all credit to Platform over the last few years for actually getting into the nitty-gritty of how this would be delivered beyond the rhetoric around a just transition, and actually doing the engagement that needs to happen to make sure it is genuinely worker-led. Okay, thanks. Alan, let's go to you for your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Alan Debenham from Taunton. Been a member of the Green Party for the last 25 years. And I think the transition we should be talking about is from extinction to survival. Because at the moment, none of the politicians are willing to accept the idea that we are facing extinction, the sixth extinction of life on this planet. And we have to have a complete revision of the philosophy of work. What's it for, and how we fit work in with sort of nature or the environment. Because what's happening is people are talking about renewables, and you know damn well they're not renewable. I mean, for instance, if you take the use of batteries and the use of lithium, as War on Want have produced a report that says we need about 10,000 new lithium mines. Mining, extraction. Mining is about the worst, most anti-environmental thing you could possibly engage in. So nearly all the things that people talk about when they talk about a transition is basically capitalism Mark 1 to capitalism Mark 2, and all that happens is that we have a mitigation, if you like, between the extinction and the survival, a mitigation which would probably allow us to survive another maybe 20 years. But at the moment, I mean, we're facing survival in terms of life in this century. I mean, it's as serious as that. You're talking of sort of 30, 40, 50 years. And in other words, our great-grandchildren or grandchildren are seriously impacted. And as you can see, like in Valencia recently, I mean, when you get climate collapse, you get social collapse, and then you get outright violence. And in other words, it's absolutely horrific if you think if we can't do things completely differently. We've got to reduce growth. It's got to be degrowth. In other words, we've got to have an enormous recession where working people have planned. Somebody said no ban, no plan. We've got to have a serious plan how to consume a lot less, work a lot less, and spend a lot more time writing books or reading books or going for walks in the countryside or whatever. In other words, the whole philosophy of what work is all about has to be examined. And if we don't sort it out, there's going to be absolute mayhem. And at the end of it, as most of the experts say, life on this planet will be extinct by the turn of the century, which is a pity, because I mean, I rather enjoy life, but I mean, I'm 84 and I might miss out on all the misery. This is the thing, all the misery some younger people are suffering. I can see some younger people here.
Thanks,
I'm going to miss out on that horrible, horrific misery. But I mean, when you look at what's happening,
I think that as a comment more than a question.
Okay, well, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine and Gaza.
Okay, I'll move on to the question to Craig. Craig, the first question there to you was about the role of the council in the just transition, and whether they had a role in supporting that. And I think it links to Ruby's point about the role of the private sector, because actually it seems in your example that you did have a willing employer, and obviously we can't rely on that. But yeah, what role was there in the employer in like developing that transition plan? What leverage was there really from the unions? Is that why the employer did it, because there was leverage, or really was it the fact that the closure was locked in, and there was a firm government commitment, and that actually sort of ironically handed the workers leverage because the company's then terrified that they're all going to leave?
Yeah, so the first point on the council support, I think in terms of promoting future development, as far as I can gather, is they did try their best by putting an LDO in place. And just for those who aren't aware what that is a local development order, and it sort of a streamlined way of getting through planning permission, and it encourages the redevelopment of the site. That's as far as I know with the council support. In terms of the relationship between the unions and the employer, I think that just comes down to like fundamentals of the trade union movement, and building a positive relationship with an employer is beneficial for the trade union movement, and a lot of times where it's possible. In this situation, it was made a lot easier by the three unions working together. As I mentioned in the presentation, they were all working towards one common goal. It was a clear negotiation stance that they had, and they used that pre-existing good relationship to work towards, a good transition plan. Now, the point you mentioned about the government imposed closure, which it gave them a long time to put a plan in place, and that obviously encouraged the employer to help the transition. They had the time to do it, and I think the employer realised quite quickly that. I think they went through two phases. I think they announced the closure of the site, which obviously the workers knew with the government announcements, and they've seen a big drop off in staff retention. This then set in place a bit of panic within the management structure, because they had a schedule to keep to. Without the staff retention, they were going to have to shut down the plant a lot earlier than intended. So that was a key takeaway, and something that my project are going to use to help negotiate with employers is that it's in your best interests as an employer to work with the unions, because without that, you're going to have trouble real quick. So that it was something really, really good for us to take away, because, like I said, you're not going to always have an engaged employer. We all know we've probably all dealt with such a situations before, but Unipower luckily found out very quickly that it was beneficial to them to work with the unions. So I hope that covers.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thanks. Okay, then over to Les, which I think is this question about the no ban without a plan.
Well,
And
actually, yeah, it's broader than that.
sure,
It's the agenda led by the so-called energy unions, especially Unite the Union and GMB, to continue high carbon fuels indefinitely, forever, until they might run out or become more expensive. And they do so by various means, but most importantly, they do so by subordinating themselves and their membership to the leadership of the fossil fuel industry, whose basic strategy is to continue for as long as possible by greenwashing high carbon fuels, but either pretending that they are already low carbon or could become low carbon through some hypothetical technofix that doesn't yet exist and will probably never exist. Now, the two main slogans here: no plan without a ban. Well, of course, sorry, no plan without a plan. Of course, there has to be a plan, and there are many alternative plans which have been developed, including by our friends in Platform and other groups. However, that needs to be taken up positively by the Chilean leadership. Instead, it hasn't been taken up. They use this silly slogan, which is a straw man argument, because nobody proposes a ban on fossil fuels. The proposal is to stop any new licenses and new exploration, and then to gradually reduce fossil fuels. Instead, what's happening is the opposite. And the government is fully behind that expansion of fossil fuels, including imports of natural gas. So no ban without a plan is a rhetorical excuse to avoid any responsibility for developing a plan that would become independent of the fossil fuel industry. They are in an alliance with the bosses of the big energy companies. And then other proposal there was
we put that to Michael, Les.
the other proposal was for biofuels. Well, this has been totally discredited as as supposedly a low carbon fuel. It all depends on false accounting and misrepresenting the source of the biomass, such as wood pellets from North America. It will never be low carbon. It's another excuse to keep the same infrastructure running for as long as possible. No,
Okay,
such as
thanks,
Drax,
thanks, Les.
Rangeback, and
I
so
want
on.
to let Michael
All this
come
is a
back on this.
sham.
Okay,
All these proposals are a means to block any low carbon transition. Now, of course, it has to be a just transition, but by
Les,
blocking a
I want to
transition,
let Michael come back on your question. Okay, so
this blocks an alliance which could create a.
okay, Michael, do you want to respond?
In terms of Unite's relationship to the energy sector, well, Unite's national policy is that we call for the public ownership of the energy system in its entirety. So we're certainly not in cahoots with the ownership of energy companies, and we've spent much of the last couple of years criticizing their excess profiteering. In terms of biofuel, I'm afraid I don't know. I don't know the details other than the workforce of Grangemouth have raised that as a possible alternative use for the site. In terms of the no ban slogan, as I alluded to initially, I think we're learning lessons as we go, and I think that slogan is certainly an interesting conversation starter. Probably, I think our position would be more accurately, a ban must be accompanied by a viable funded transition plan, but we ended up with what we got. What I would say on that, though, in terms of the messaging, is that we can't underestimate the level of Tufton Street-inspired climate skepticism, climate denial, which is out there, and the public cut through that message has. And that's something in the field work that we've been doing in communities, door knocking in communities, in oil and gas communities. That has tremendous cut through. And I think some of the workforces, some of the communities that we've been approaching, had we been approaching with a more perhaps more conventional climate message, we wouldn't even have had a conversation. And I think whatever the flaws of the slogan that we chose, it's opened conversations for us that we otherwise wouldn't have had. But no, I completely refute that we're in cahoots with the energy, the ownership of the energy sector. If anything, quite the opposite. We're quite openly condemning them.
Okay, thanks, Michael. There's a question in the chat about any comment on Port Talbot. So I don't know if any of the speakers want to comment on that. I'll come to Julian, but also if you don't usually ask questions at these sorts of things, please do feel free to put your hand up and come in. Particularly keen to hear from people who don't usually speak. And also, Julian, please keep your question or comment to 2 minutes at most. Okay, Julian, go ahead.
Oh, I thought you were calling somebody else just to reply on something first.
Well, I'm offering the speakers if they want to come in on Port Talbot. Michael, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'll keep it really quick. Yeah, Port Talbot. There was lessons from that. Tartar always wanted to close the site. Tartar have no commitment whatsoever to any climate agenda, given that they're building an enormous blast furnace in India right now. It's the proposals that Unite had for Port Talbot, which I'm guessing, given the timing of the question, was a reference to the multi-union working at Ratcliffe. Unite's position on the original multi-union agreement for Port Talbot that was that that agreement, which I'm not going to get into union politics, but that agreement accepted a need for job losses, which we didn't feel were necessary. We brought an alternative proposal, which would have involved a larger capacity electric arc furnace and a direct reduced iron facility at Port Talbot, similar to what Tartar were developing at their sister site in the Netherlands. Clearly, that's not gone ahead. There were massive opportunities at Port Talbot which have been wasted by a government that just wasn't bold enough to intervene on the scale it needed to. Ultimately, the steel sector needs to be renationalised, but our steel workforce, our steel membership, have not called for public ownership in the same way that our energy membership have. So that's not Unite's official position.
Thanks. Greg, do you want to just quickly comment on Port Talbot as well? Is that what you have?
Michael raised some really good points there. I just wanted to quickly my project within the TUC, the worker-led transition team, that can't be a greater example of how important the work is that we are going to be doing in planning in advance, getting in and looking at target high carbon manufacturing sites, putting a plan in place early so that if the worst was to happen, for example, Port Talbot, there's already a negotiated plan in place for what would happen to the workers, where the jobs would go. Obviously that's that ideal situation, but again, it just comes back to the point I made earlier about time and foresight and making sure that the work's being done in advance. But yeah, it was great points from Michael there.
Great, thanks. Julian?
Thanks very much. I'm just going to make a few comments if that's okay, but yeah, please cut me off if I go too long. some of the thoughts I was having listening to Ruby, especially about the jobs not being there, and yet we know, for example, that we are going to desperately need a whole load of heat pump installers, but we don't have the pipeline in the industry yet for those jobs, and we could suddenly be in a situation where actually we need to import people from Scandinavia because they've got the skilled workers there and we don't. But by and large, those roles will no longer be in big industries; they'll be in SMEs, and that transition is a tricky one, perhaps for unions, because SMEs are less organised, traditionally speaking. So I think there's a lot to think about in terms of what the transition jobs might actually look like, and sort of preparing the ground for the workers and for the unions and for the potential investors in that story. What I wanted to throw in actually was, people probably know there's a whole, my head's in local government, so there's a whole bunch of reorganisation threatened, planned, however you want to put it. We've got combined authorities which are going to have compulsory growth plans. Now, we can argue about the word growth. We should argue about the word growth, but it might be that, as in line with what Ruby was saying, we need to be fighting for those growth plans to have a net zero test, but we also need to fight for them to have a just transition test. So maybe it's about actually putting together a very specific political demand, so that as those growth plans come forward, that they actually have within them, because they're going to be geographical, they're going to be local, they have a specific target. Or a specific sort of work stream around a just transition, around passporting people perhaps through training opportunities from dirty industries into clean industries. So that's something that I'll take away and think about in terms of what our councillors can call for. Just a very brief comment. I mean, I think, in terms of the way, we've got to find a way to talk to people in the trade union movement, and we can't tell them you've got to go and read books and write books. We've got to talk to them about livelihoods in the future, and I think that I think we can do that, but I think we've got to start from that position.
Thanks, Julian. Okay, I did say that we would try and finish by 7:50. So if it is okay with the speakers, I'll let Vincent, I can see, and then Roy make their quick points, please, both of you. And then any response to those three from any of the speakers, and then we'll move on to just the members' business. So yeah, Vincent, go ahead, but please do keep it brief if you can.
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay, brilliant. So basically, I finished my PhD in conservation procedures, and it's really a cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary analysis of the deleterious effects that we've caused on this planet. And I think I really sort of resonate with what Les and Alan said in regards to understanding the immediacy of the situation. It really is a matter of extinction versus survival. And my own research, and I am basically, not to blow my own trumpet, but I am generally considered to be an expert in this field. And I'm a member of Scientist Rebellion, New Paradigm Institute, World Health Alliance, etc., etc. And ultimately, my research has confirmed and been peer-reviewed and verified that we have until about 80 to 85 years until our species is extinct. In terms of surface civilization, globalized, organized civilization, we're talking 20, 25 years, absolute tops. So we're talking 2040s, and it's already happening now. You're seeing entire communities devastated. So what we need a shift in psychology. We need to change the way in which we operate as cognitive beings. We need a complete reappropriation of funding, and that will allow reappropriation and direction of education, and thus a fast and immediate transition, rather than posturing and focusing on minutiae and trying to preserve current infrastructure, because it needs a complete rewiring. The entire system needs to be rebooted from the ground up. If we don't do that, we're dead. It's that simple. So ultimately, this is a huge challenge. And we also have to understand that fossil fuels are the basis for between 50 to 90% of all commercial products. So there is a derivative from a fossil fuel that is in between 50 to 90% of all products that are produced. So it's literally systemic, the problem. And that's why they're trying to perpetuate, excuse me, let me finish. And that's why they're trying to perpetuate, that's why they're trying to perpetuate the continuation of the current infrastructure. So we need immediate change and immediate reappropriation of funds, education, and immediate reappropriation of human resources if we are to survive. And it's literally that simple. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Roy?
I think it's really important that we need to win the workers to the idea of just transition. I'm really interested by some of the comments earlier by the speakers, and I think we need to take those on, and I think if we don't win them over, we have a problem. We have a problem with like stuff that the right wing, like in Trump and other people, are coming forward. And we have to win them over. And I'm really interested how that's being done. We have to guarantee proper pay as well. That's you can't accept workers for the sake of their families. You can't expect them to go to new jobs if they're not paid the same level and they've got the same opportunities. It's as simple as that, really. And I'm really pleased that the meeting's been put on. And in the party, we need to be arguing this is a serious priority that we need to promote and win the party over. That means building a movement as well as elections. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Roy. Any final words, Craig, Ruby, or Michael, particularly on that challenge of winning over workers who aren't with us yet?
Yeah, we've been doing a bit of work on messaging when it comes to just transition. We've been finding that the term just transition itself is quite challenging to sell in high carbon settings. We find future proofing is a term that can sell quite well. Safeguarding. I think within high carbon settings, it can. There's a fear that we're coming to take your jobs, when in reality, the just transition, and this is what I actually put in the presentation, it shouldn't leave workers behind. It's trying to find that balance between the two. The ideal situation is that you're accelerating action on climate change while also transitioning a workforce into green jobs. But yeah, that is certainly a challenge, and we're finding that the messaging is really important when it comes to getting workplaces on board. I think you were going to say something as well there, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think hope is the biggest motivator. What we found is that talking about small scale benefits, what possibilities there are for more and better jobs in your immediate community motivates people to listen to you. The more apocalyptic your rhetoric, the less people listen to you. And in a democratic society, we need the bulk of people on our side. And we do that by hope, by giving people an explanation of how we get from where we are now to a better future. Hanging the kind of the spectre of extinction over people simply will not motivate the majority of the public to a position. So it's about giving people hope.
I ended up staying the whole thing. Yeah, I guess just two final comments. Like, really agree. All of the work that we did with the Our Power report, very much like the whole point of it was starting from people's like from bread and butter issues, from where people are at, from the condition, like building a shared united, both the climate movement and works in the oil and gas industry, both like hating the oil and gas industry and feeling like they were being screwed over from an environmental perspective, from a worker perspective, and starting from like those issues rather than the climate. And as I say, we now work with like a really committed group of oil and gas workers who, like, the most famous line we use is one of them often talks about, like, before meeting Gabby, my predecessor, like the only thing he would have given the climate movement was a square go, which is like Scottish for a fist fight. And now he's like regularly attending meetings talking about a just transition and the need for a just transition. And I think that like it's obviously like I really, really recognize some of the comments made about like the urgency of it. I feel that a lot, I promise. But I think it has to start from that position. And I think we, as the climate movement, haven't always got that right. I think that has left a bit of an open goal for industry and politicians to be able to divide us and criticize the climate movement, criticize climate action for the effect it'll have on workers and like quote unquote ordinary people. And I think therefore it makes like it's strategically integral that we don't like repeat those mistakes, and we start to like undercut those arguments by starting from a position of a just transition and like centering just transition demands, concrete just transition demands in all of our climate campaigns.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, and I think that even I think it's quite positive to see the worker-led transition language emerging, because I think, well, partly just transition's always felt a little bit abstract in terms of what it actually means, but also has been adopted, I think, by companies in some cases who are using it as a little bit of a crutch for their own purposes, for delaying as a delaying tactic, and not really what it's about, which is clearly workers at the forefront of it. And having that message about workers' empowerment at the forefront of a just transition, as opposed to just doing things slowly, more slowly than we otherwise would, is really important. And maybe the employment rights bill will have some impact on increasing that level of empowerment generally, so that workers feel like they've actually got the leverage to lead the transition, and make that feel a bit more realistic. Okay, thank you very much. Can we do a virtual round of applause for Craig and for Ruby and for Michael for giving their time this evening? It's really great to hear from all three of you. And if you can send me your presentations, that'd be really helpful, so I can send those around to people who've requested them. Okay, thank you all.